same medicines work for every living species on planet Earth. And that's because every living species on planet Earth has an endocannabinoid system, including sea cucumbers, actually. Yeah. Insects don't. No, that's right. Basically, yeah. But if you have a spinal cord and a nervous system, you basically have an endocannabinoid system. I don't think jellyfish do, no. No. Don't have a spinal cord. No. And it's very old as well. Hey? No, it's a good point, but no. I think sea cucumbers are the exception. And then everything... Don't think so. No. They have a nervous system. Well, they might have been. What's really interesting too is that there's now two receptors in the human body, the CB1, cannabinoid 1 and cannabinoid 2. And they came about at the end of what was called the Precambrian era, which ended 521 million years ago on planet Earth. And that's when there was a split in nature to vertebrates and invertebrates. Hey? That was called phylogenetics. So they can look at genetics and then create family trees basically, looking back at species over time. Phylogenetics it's called. So that was 521 million years ago that vertebrates first appeared on planet Earth, and then with that the two receptors in the endocannabinoid system. One which is in the brain, the CB1 receptor, and one that's in the periphery, the CB2 receptor. And what continually baffles me is that the CB1 receptor is the most abundant receptor in the human brain. And how many doctors talk about using it to treat people? Well, not many, not enough, considering that it's the most abundant receptor. I said it to a psychiatrist recently. I said, you know, the CB1 receptor is the most abundant in the brain. And he sort of looked at me because he didn't know that. No, exactly. And then the penny dropped. He was like, and I'm like, right, because that's what I'm saying. That, you know, we're treating something that's, you know, the most abundant receptor in the brain. And he was just like, and you could just see in that moment he suddenly got it. Like, right, that's what we're talking about, you know. And the fact it's so old. And interestingly, we have a primary endocannabinoid that's called anandamide. Now, in proper science terms, I think it's arachidonyl ethanolamine is what it's called. But the fellow who discovered it, which was in 1992, realised what it did, and that it created homeostasis, which we're going to get to in a sec. But because of that, he called it Ananda, and then amide. And Ananda being the Sanskrit word for internal bliss or harmony. So he realised that this receptor's action was to create internal harmony. And interestingly, every vertebrate on the planet has an anandamide, and it's also in plants as well. And very interestingly, it's in high amounts in chocolate. Hence why people feel good when they eat chocolate. Yeah. And there's a few other myths as well. One being the feeling after exercise when we feel good, that's caused by anandamide. And this idea that it's an endorphin, which is a naturally occurring opiate, is actually completely incorrect. So they don't cross the blood-brain barrier, so there's no way that those molecules can cross into the brain to have that effect. So when you start to think about it, we have this molecule that is named after the Sanskrit word for bliss, that is boosted when we have exercise, so we feel good. It's in chocolate as well, and that's why it makes us feel good. And CBD's primary action is to block the enzyme that breaks down anandamide, which ANANDAMIDE. So CBD's main action is to boost the levels of this neurotransmitter. And the way I conceptualise people starting to understand how it makes us feel after you've done lots of exercise, after you eat chocolate. So that's its kind of role in physiology. And it does that at the most abundant receptor in the human brain. And when you start to think about it like that, plus the fact it's been around for 500 million years, so it obviously confers a survival advantage to every vertebrate on planet Earth. And then people say, well, what's the survival advantage of this neurotransmitter, given that we all think in survival in terms of running away from dinosaurs? You know, how can it be possible that this is conferred survival advantage when it doesn't mean we have to get away from dinosaurs? Well, the survival advantage is homeostasis, which is feeling like you just had chocolate. So it kind of then proves that feeling good and homeostatic and connected and regulated is utterly essential for survival of virtually every species on planet Earth. And we live in a medical system that doesn't give it any credence whatsoever, which is maybe why it's not working, basically. So homeostasis, I like asking people about this. What do you guys understand by the term homeostasis? You can just shout out if you've got any ideas. Equilibrium, that's a good one. Balance, exactly. So here's the next bit. What does it feel like? Because we say balance and equilibrium and homeostasis, but what does it feel like? Free? Any other words? Bliss? No pain? Easy? Awesome. These are great, because mostly people say no pain, no anxiety, no seizures. And I always come back and say, well, why does it have to be the absence of something bad? Why can't it be the presence of something really, really good? When it shows how we're all conditioned to think medically in terms of I am not anxious, I don't have a funny feeling in my stomach, I don't have sweaty hands. But what do you have? You have a feeling of homeostasis, which is feeling blissful and equilibrium and balanced and wonderful and connected and quiet. So here we have a medicine that we can give to people to help them feel quiet. A lot of people will use CBD and say, I feel like myself again. And that's a good one, because what do you mean you feel like yourself? You're yourself every day, aren't you? And we all say, I'm not myself today, but I am myself today. Exactly, who are you if you're not yourself? I don't feel my best self. I don't feel my homeostatic self, which is what it means. I don't feel very good today. So here we have a medicine that can take people from not feeling themselves to themselves. And it's probably one of the safest compounds available for medical use, and the entire system has a problem with it. Yeah, well, there's other ones that are better for that actually, but that's not the purpose of this talk. Yeah, exactly. That's the point. So it kind of leads me to my next thought process, which has been going around my head a lot recently, because we talk, especially here today, we're talking about the medical use of the plant and the recreational use of the plant. And I don't really understand that anymore, because it's the same. Yes, but is the recreational use smoking 25 bongs a day with tobacco? Because I don't think that's cool, whether it's legal or not. I think that's crazy. So there's a right way to use the plant, which doesn't involve smoking it and bonging it and blowing your brains out, or running away from your problems, just like people do with alcohol, which a lot of people use cannabis very negatively. So part of a society that has a mature relationship with the plant and allows recreational use is getting away from saying recreational use and understanding that it can make us all feel like ourselves. So we get home from work and we want to feel like ourselves, so we can be with our children, we can sleep. You know? So it's a fundamental shift in how we actually approach it, and I think part of a mature society that's going to allow us to use cannabinoids freely, it's going to allow people, you know, euthanasia, people can choose to die if they wish to allow us to use psychedelic medicines. This is a society that is actually far more mature than the one we currently exist in, both at a personal level and I would say a political level as well. So I think a lot of these understandings about homeostasis and feeling good and feeling balanced, but not necessarily blowing your brains out every night, is a very important balance that we need to find if we're going to mainstream cannabinoids. And by mainstream, I mean that every single person can use them every single day. It was really interesting listening to the lady before talking about animals as well, and how she proposed putting hemp and other such things in everything that animals eat. They used to. And when you have to go back 100 years to move away from when we had a hemp-based economy, not just a hemp-based society, a hemp-based economy. You know, hemp was everything. The founding fathers of the US were all hemp farmers. The British Empire was built on hemp. Australia was colonised to grow hemp. Yeah, they said it was everywhere. Yeah, totally. I grew up near a town in the UK called Hempstead, which was Anglo-Saxon for heavenly hemp fields. Well, it was only about 100 years ago. The cotton farmers wanted the land for hemp. So that's when the war on hemp started, with the propaganda was in the US, because the cotton farmers wanted the land that they were growing hemp on. So that's when it started. The darkies will kill your kids, they smoke the ganja, all this kind of stuff. Marijuana was a word, it's a Spanish word, so they took it from the Mexicans and you twisted it back on them as a derogatory term, which is why I don't like using the term. Not because I'm trying to make people understand cannabis, but it was actually used as a derogatory term when the war against hemp came around. Yeah. Well, he did, but if you look at the old bottles of cocaine, yeah. Well, cocaine's an interesting one because, you know the local anaesthetic you get when you have the tooth taken out? Lignocaine. So the dentists used to rub cocaine on until they worked out that it blocked the sodium channel on the nerve. So then they manipulated it into local anaesthetics. So all local anaesthetics are derivatives of cocaine. Lignocaine, exactly. So most of the drugs we use medically are derivatives of street drugs. Opiates, local anaesthetics, benzos not so much, cannabinoids now, amphetamines, you know, people using dexamphetamines to treat ADHD. Yeah, Ritalin, exactly. Not much different to the effect you get from smoking meth, you know. So it works therapeutically, but everyone's wagging their finger at cannabis saying, oh, cannabis, you guys are bad. It's like, well, it's the safest, and all we're doing is what we've been doing in medicine for the last 150 years, which is take useful drugs that can be street drugs and turning them into medicinal ones. Totally. Well, this is where it started. If you look at the old bottles of cannabis medicine, all of the indications of what we're now allowed to prescribe it for through the TGA, except the last one, causing a general feeling of contentment. We're not allowed to prescribe it for that yet. We will be able to, though. So, but interesting, if you go back to those cultures or societies that hemp was everywhere, they'd throw it everywhere. In the UK, you had to grow it, just like in Thailand now, where everyone has to grow cannabis plants now that they've changed the law to make money. It's great. But if you think about our society, so now we're introducing cannabinoids back as a medicine, but back then they were everywhere. They were in our clothes, they were in our food, they were in the food the animals ate, then we ate the animals. So humans were getting cannabinoids everywhere, in all aspects of our diet and lifestyle, all the time. And it was medicine as well. And then 100 years ago it got banned completely. And I think it's interesting to think about a culture, a society that went for hundreds, if not thousands of years using hemp, and then it got stopped suddenly. Because of the cotton farmers and the medicine, so it's pharmaceutical as well. It was the same reason. The cotton farmers wanted the hemp background, and the Rockefellers didn't want cannabis as a medicine because it treated everything. So you couldn't devise the current pharmaceutical system. Yes. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. But this is a hemp-based economy, right? Because hemp oil has biofuel has a higher flash point than petrol. So it's better than petrol. It's stronger than cotton. It's a food, it's a medicine, all the things we know about it. And then you look at what's happened since it was banned, you know, turn of the last century. Yeah, but the world there's lots of diseases of modern life, right, which are caused by stress. Now, our endocannabinoid system is how we respond to stress. That's what it does. So if that's buggered, then we don't respond to stress. We walk around stressed all the time. Hypervigilance, fight or flight, trauma responses. So more and more pharmaceuticals are coming out to try and fix the problem. Well, this is the other thing, right? Because if you think about integrative structure, what will happen in medicine over the next 10 or 15 years, I hope not that long, will be that most of the conditions they're trying to find a cause for have the same cause, which is a deficiency of the endocannabinoid system, which is a deficiency in how we respond to stress. But the symptoms you might get from that system going wrong might be very different to mine. So it looks different, but the root cause is exactly the same thing. Exactly. So all of these problems have occurred in the last 100 years, since what everyone was using every day, whether they were doing it intentionally or not, or eating animals that had been fed on cannabinoids. Everyone had it in their system.
Could I ask a question, please?
Sure.
Are you saying that people naturally have receptors in their brain even long before hemp was parallel in that economy you just discussed? Are you talking ancient times?
Ancient.
Ancient.
So the division, originally it was called a vanilloid receptor. This is vanilloid, and this is hundreds of millions of years ago, and then it evolved into what is the precursor to the CB1 receptor, and then 521 million years ago, when there was a split between vertebrates and invertebrates, is when the CB1 and the CB2 receptor appeared in nature. So that was before the dinosaurs, basically, and we were just coming out of primordial soup, basically.
So they weren't even mammals?
This is before vertebrates existed, there were cannabinoid receptors.
Like in algae?
Hey?
In algae and like in plants?
Yeah, in algae and plants. That would be my assumption. I haven't found the data yet, but I haven't gone back that far. But we all came out of the same primordial slough. The cannabinoid plant in people, the opium poppy in people. So us having receptors in our body when we all basically came from the same pond that match a plant is not... Yes, exactly. So that's the phylogenetics. It just spreads and spreads and spreads.
Thank you.
And if you think about the opioid system, we have mu and kappa opioids in our bodies, right? And before I told you that endorphins don't give us a feeling of well-being, as in when we're running. It's not strictly true. They do give us a feeling of well-being when we're being eaten by dinosaurs. So that's what the dissociative response. So if a lion starts chewing on your leg, your brain will release stacks of endorphins, mu and kappa opioids, to make it a little bit better that you're being eaten by a lion. So it's a naturally occurring anaesthetic. And when you think how we use them medically, great, the surgeon has opened your chest, you need an anaesthetic. So we take synthetic opioids and give them to people to knock them out. They have a use. They don't have a use in creating well-being and homeostasis. In fact, they dissociate people. And then when you understand that, and you think about all the people with trauma and mental health problems with chronic pain who are given opioids, their body then recognises that I'm about to be eaten by a lion. I'm dying. So they're never going to heal. And that's the point of the ECS, because when you engage it, the body then goes, oh, I can heal. So we say parasympathetic, rest, digest, heal, right? But the issue with that is that there's a parasympathetic overdrive when you're being eaten by a dinosaur as well. But there's a flood of opioids with that parasympathetic response. And when you're good and sitting here and walking around today, that's a parasympathetic with a flood of endocannabinoids. So those two plants represent a system within the human body. Now, if you've seen someone shooting up heroin, they look pretty happy. They're not, but they look pretty happy. They can't be happy because they're shooting up heroin. So by definition, they're not happy people. But they look the same as you and I might look right now. But internally, they're a mess, they're fragmented, they're not themselves. Internally, when cannabinoids kick in, is when we're all sitting like right now. It's totally different. Yes?
How does that relate to the cortisol adrenaline system? Or did you mention that?
No, it's a good question. So that's what happens when you're being chased by a dinosaur.
But even like say car crashes or roads are tight, out comes your cortisol, which makes us all fat and all that.
Yeah.
Is that related to
Yes.
the endocannabinoid?
Well, it's not. It's a different system. So that's called the hypothalamic pituitary axis. But the hypothalamic HPA axis, you'd be able to find it if you Google that. But the endocannabinoid system regulates the HPA axis. So if you think about it, you have a fear cascade. So you get more and more stressed as you're being chased by a lion, more and more and more, worse and worse, more and more adrenaline. And then the lion gets you and the opioids kick in. And you come back down to what appears to be relaxed, but you're over here somewhere. Now the endocannabinoid system is constantly trying to reverse that fight or flight response, right? But a lot of people, especially with trauma, they get stuck on that fear cascade. They can't get back to zero. their cortisol and catecholamines and whatever are just running wild and have reset the system. Yes, exactly, the dinosaurs and they're unconscious, but they're always being chased by a dinosaur. So that is a endocannabinoid state. They haven't got enough endocannabinoids to bring them back down. Why do people with PTSD choose to use cannabis? And you explain this to some doctors, it's like you just see light bulbs go off. Right, they're not druggies, it makes them feel good because it engages a physiology in their body that brings them back to homeostasis. And they don't feel homeostatic very often because they have PTSD. And dinosaurs are everywhere. That's why it works so well. Yeah.
That's true of all drugs. All drugs have a reason that you take it, like looking for love or looking for excess or whatever, and if you can address that, then
Totally.
right.
Can I clarify that though? Because I think most naturally occurring drugs, there's a reason for them. I don't think that applies to ones that humans have tried to devise to replace nature, because I think we can get rid of a lot of those because they don't really work. Because nature does actually have all of the compounds we need if they're used in the right way.
So basically I was going to ask you to speak about this, what Liz is speaking about, and those other substances that come from the pharmacy, God's pharmacy, they stimulate different areas of the brain, because you've got like the cannabis is the endocannabinoid system, and other areas of the brain that are stimulated from mushrooms for emotional well-being and
so first up, we have the famous Hongshire, well-known in the southern states, using the classic overhand technique, the Chuka Chaka. And we have Aidan today as our bomb master. As you know, it's a very important job to build a bomb.
Psilocybin, you mean?
Give them to the spectators.
Yes, grows on barley, right? Used to be in the beer until the Clean Beer Act.
That's what's great medicine.
This LSD is derivative of herbal, which was in beer until the Clean Beer Act, when everyone was walking around tripping whenever they drank alcohol, basically.
Well, they didn't have water.
Yeah, clean water.
But they all do nervous system and homeostasis,
yes.
and work different areas of our psycho-spiritual body
Totally.
to rebalance.
Yeah.
Really.
Well, I think that's what science is going to catch up with, which was just a matter of time. But I think a lot about, think about prana or chi or meridians or these ideas of a balanced, regulated energy flow in the human body. That is the endocannabinoid system. That you could layer over the top. And I think, because it causes this sort of coordination on a synaptic level, and it brings all these different neuronal pathways into homeostasis, right? Now when we become homeostatic, and we maybe get what's called, this is a thesis I'm writing, but a more than usual coordination of mind, brain and body. That's when we start to ascend, yes, to mystical experiences. And a lot of people talk about psilocybin and psychedelics as leading to that, but I think that's because of the endocannabinoid system. And this is where it's going wrong, because people, as soon as you say cannabinoid, they think about what we're here for today and all the leaves, the plant. But the endocannabinoid system can also have nothing to do with the cannabis plant. It just happens to be something that stimulates it. And this is what's going wrong in medicine, because you say it's the endocannabinoid system. And, a lot of doctors will say, this guy's nuts. It's endogenous, because they immediately think of cannabis, which is a complete error. It's myopic and stupid, because once we accept that there's a physiology, that's what's most important. It can be stimulated by chocolate, by cannabis, by psychedelics, by sex, by emotional connection, by running. Anything that makes you feel good will return homeostasis.
That's why the indigenous people, they get charged all the time with their connection to earth and the celestial. They can't be in the house and the box.
No.
And they charged all the time. Got that endogenous.
And I heard the yell.
Homeostasis, yes. So that then, once we accept that homeostasis is a basic, not only a basic human right, a basic right of every living species on the planet, then the primary objective has to be to returning homeostasis to each and every single one of those organisms. And how are we going to do that? We start operating in a very, very different fashion. because we sort of start to accept that we're supposed to be in our endocannabinoid systems. That's what nature intended for us. And anyone who's not, hypervigilant and stressed, they're actually going against nature. But we live in this very reductionist paradigm that just sees it as, oh, no anxiety, or no pain, or no seizures, not feeling better than you've ever felt, totally in love with your friends, your family, your kids, everything's going well, flowing. That's what we should be aiming for. But if you start talking like that as a doctor up until very recently, people think you're absolutely batshit crazy. Batshit crazy for talking about feeling good. I'm going to give you a medicine that's going to make you feel good. Oh, lock him up. How dare he make you feel good? It's completely backwards. It's wrong, yes. But that's what I was saying earlier too. I think also blowing your brains out with bongs all day is also wrong. So I'm not saying it doesn't come with the negative. I'm saying that we have to completely change how we interact with this plant.
We need to get rid of the Rockefellers and their ilk, because they're the ones who are turning medicine into an absence of Prozac rather than an absence of joy. You know?
Yeah.
So until we conquer the banking system, which is running Vanguard and BlackRock and all these people running Big Pharma, the truth isn't likely to come out, is it?
Well, it's coming out.
It's coming out, that's true. There's a lot of it now.
And I think it's also interesting, if you think about how drugs are approved, you know, the current, so to get cannabis registered as a therapeutic drug so you can go on the PBS, which is a good thing, because mostly the dose of CBD required to help people is hundreds of milligrams a day. It's not 10 or 20, it's 4, 5, 6, 800 milligrams a day. Well, yeah. Well, beyond that, we should be able, that's the point, we should be able to grow ourselves, absolutely. But we're way off that. But to get big enough doses into people, the government has to support it, because no one can afford $80 a day on CBD. But mostly that's the dose required for a lot of people. And a lot of this 10 or 20 milligrams a day, it's not true. It's just placebo.
How do you manage your life when you're going through processing
CBD?
CBD we're talking about.
Only CBD. Yeah, not THC. CBD. I forgot what I was going with that. What was I going with that? Doses required. Yes, it's registration, right? So, and this isn't conspiracy. This is just fact. So to register a drug costs 250 million US. That's what it costs. So now this system was introduced to protect us, and it was a good thing. It was after thalidomide. So thalidomide was an anti-nausea drug that was given to women, and all the children were born deformed. Now, interestingly, Australia was the first country in the world to introduce thalidomide. And you look what happened, which is why the TGA will never be the first thalidomide. So the TGA will never be the first country in the world to introduce one of these drugs, ever. It's never going to happen, right? So because of that, they decided they needed to protect us from these dodgy pharmaceutical companies, right? So they brought in the system of registering drugs. It cost $250 million. But those guys said, well, what about me? I've just spent $250 million. I said, well, you can have a patent, mate. So only you can have it for 10 years to get your money back. Great, we'll do that. But you can't patent CBD, THC, you can't patent psilocybin, you can't patent MDMA. So the very way medicines get through cannot be done with those that probably are the most effective that we can get our hands on. Can't patent it, so no one's going to spend the money. So that's each indication. So CBD for seizures, 250 million. CBD for anxiety, 250 million.
So do you reckon that was a deliberate thing to make them sit on their ass and say, so, you know?
I don't know about that, I just talk about the facts.
It looks like it, doesn't it?
Well, when you look at the facts, you can make your own, decisions, thoughts, but that's the fact. So the fact is we are not going to get cannabinoids on the ARTG in its current form.
So you could then say, well, I'm not going to go down Australia's path, so I'm not going down.
Yeah. It's a rabbit hole. Yeah. But this is for something that stimulates the most abundant receptor in the brain and is a God-given right of every single living species on planet Earth, because we have a system that's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of years old. And we can't access it because we can't raise 250 million bucks, which is really sad. So the only way to do it is to do what we're doing now, which is people take it and it gets them better. Do you like it? Yeah. Any problems? No. Okay, don't drive. Here you go. they're going to make the decision because they're the ones spending the money on it. No one's going to spend the money on it if it doesn't work. The numbers have already got us through. We're already there.
But what about Portugal and Canada,
Well, they decriminalised it, which is probably the way to go for most of these compounds. But this, yes, but then there comes a construct with that, which is the right way to use them. I don't know if you've read Michael Pollan's book, but he comes up with this great point about a couple of plant medicines, one being coffee. We have a construct to use it in society. You start drinking coffee at 10 o'clock every night, someone will say, you're right, you've been drinking coffee at 10 o'clock every night. Beer, you start drinking beer at 10 o'clock every morning and you're hitting it every day all day. Someone's going to say, buddy, you're right, beer's a bit much. So for the whole, most of us sit in this kind of societal regulation of each other, of how to use the substance in the right way. And because of prohibition, we don't have that for cannabis. So we have to introduce that for cannabis in order for the society to make it work. And at the moment, you've got the kind of prohibitionists on one side and a lot of people on the other side saying, I'm going to do whatever I like. And actually it's in the middle, which is using cannabinoids to return homeostasis and using them in an appropriate way. Some people daily, others not. If you want to come home and have a bit of CBD and THC, there's nothing wrong with that. If you want to drink litres of it every night, there probably is a problem. The problem, however, is not the plant. The problem is the pain that person's in that requires them to drink litres of it every night. And we keep blaming the plant instead of addressing the problem, which is the pain that all these people have. Exactly. So, CBD is good for kids if they have the right conditions. I think THC is a bit, there's probably a way to go. Yeah, epilepsy, anxiety, autism. Yeah. Well, anything that results from not having homeostasis, right? And that affects babies. Yeah. And if you think about babies, what brings them homeostasis? Well, that's their mother. And that talking and that interplay, that's what's teaching those babies homeostasis. So the breast milk, the mother's interaction is making their endocannabinoid system sing. Yeah. Totally. In the colostrum of breast milk is packed full of 2-AG, which is the other major endocannabinoid. And they did some experiments on mice. I don't like animal experiments, but this is interesting. So they blocked the 2-AG receptors in all the pups' brains when they went onto the food. And they never latched, and they all died. So the endocannabinoid system is responsible for that initial latching onto the breast of the baby, homeostasis, being fed, being loved, being warm. Yeah, exactly. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It's great for mastitis too, especially my goats.
So I actually have to run pretty soon. What's the time? 1:15. Alright, so maybe we'll do questions and then I've got to get upstairs for another one. Does anyone have any questions? We've done a few. It's everywhere. Like I said, I grew up in near a town called Hemel, and it was named that in like 370 AD, Hemel Hempstead. Heavenly Hemel Hemp Stead was fields. Heavenly Hemp fields. H-E-M-E-L. Yeah, it was obligatory. Yeah. That's what happened in the Hunter apparently, when the first fleet went down there, they chucked loads, and sometime in the 80s there was like massive, right? And they all got exterminated. Don't get rid of that shit, make it feel good. Terrible. Yeah. All this kind of stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
There must be other plants or fungi or things like that that also act on these receptors.
Yeah, totally. All sorts.
Do they have like a dossier of what's been studied?
Not that I know of. No. I mean, like I said earlier, chocolate's full of anandamide, so that's why we feel good. Then there's other cannabinoids, so PEA, CEA, there's all these different ones. Yeah, one thing I say a lot is it would be quite handy if I could go to South America and find another plant that was full of CBD and THC and not the cannabis plant, because it would make my life a lot easier prescribing it, because I wouldn't have to do all the shit that comes with cannabis. I could say, oh look, there's another one that does the same thing, it's not banned and doesn't have this bad rap. So yeah, there's lots.
Have you heard of any studies that examine whether natural practices which induce the endogenous
29.6 meters!
Yes, yeah. So there's one, it's not the greatest study, it wasn't blinded, looking at a meditation retreat. So they found anandamide levels were boosted after the meditation retreat. So I think that meditation, emotional homeostasis, that's what I'm saying, that's the endocannabinoid system. There's orgasms, yeah, oxytocin's in there for that as well. There was a study that came out recently looking at people who've been drinking ayahuasca, and anandamide levels went up after that experience, which is what I was saying. I think that in time will prove, they'll prove that you've got these major psychedelic effects, but then the returning of homeostasis and emotional regulation is due to resetting the ECS as well. But everyone says, oh no, it can't be, it's not cannabis. And I'm like, right, it's not thinking about it properly. It's a physiology that is stimulated by lots of different things. Meditation, yoga, exercise, embodied communication, cannabis, chocolate. It's all of them, which is all part of living healthily. Yeah, exactly. And there's no point having lots of cannabinoids in your system if you're, in abusive relationships and live a life where you're being traumatized, because it can't undo that. So it can only do it under the right conditions, which is, mind, body and soul, basically.